Hey, and welcome back to the All My Love Lucy podcast. This is episode number 39, and we're so happy to have you with us today. Your continued support truly means more than we can say. We're so grateful that you choose to spend some of your time with us as we continue to uncover and honor our grandparents' extraordinary love story. And now, as I've been saying week after week, we are hoping to return to video episodes soon with Megan. And Megan, I know you're listening. We need you to get back here. So let's get on it. Let's let's get back together because I miss you and I know all of our viewers miss you as well. And if you are listening and will do me a favor and leave a comment directly to Megan and tell her, yes, we miss you and we want you to get back soon. That would be great. I would really appreciate that. So feel free to leave any comments though, share your thoughts, join in on the conversation. We love to hear from y'all. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our content as we upload it. Now, if you're joining us for the first time, I do always like to give a quick bit of context so that you know what this podcast is about. Each week, we share a letter written by our grandmother Lucy from London during World War II. And we do have some from Jimmie, our grandfather, but she was writing to him while he was serving in Europe with the U.S. Army's 50th Signal Battalion, and he would write back to her from wherever he was stationed at the time. Now, the two of them were engaged just before he left for Normandy for D-Day. So in May of 1944, they got engaged, and then he had to leave. But they were fully expecting to be married shortly after that. They thought he was going to be coming back to London, and then they could get married and then they were going to come into the United States and live and start a family. But he got shipped back to the United States before he could return to London, and they were separated for nearly 2 long years because of this. Because Lucy couldn't get transportation, she could not get across to the United States even after the war was over because of travel restrictions and priority for spouses and things like that that kept her from getting a ticket on a plane or however she was trying to get over here. So these letters, again, are from that time period when they were apart, from the time they departed at the train station in May of 1944 all the way through April of 1946. And through these letters, we are given an intimate window into their daily lives, their longing, their resilience, and the quiet sacrifices they made during one of the most turbulent periods in history. So, if this sounds like your cup of tea, then you're in the right place. We do encourage you to go back and start at episode number 1. I always like to say that our production skills in the beginning were very amateur because we were doing this ourselves. Now, we are still not professionals, but if you can kind of overlook us, then the story is incredible. Forget about us, forget about us being nervous or our production skills and all of that. The story is incredible. We hope you enjoy the story. And we do encourage you to go back to the beginning because this is more like a series podcast because we are reading the letters in chronological order. So let's dive in today. Go ahead and pour yourself a cup of coffee or tea or a beverage of your choice. Grab a blanket, get cozy, and let's step back into 1944 with Lucy. October 15th, 1944. My darling Jimmie, I have just returned home at 10 p.m. after spending the day with some friends at Finchley, and it is cold and foggy, so I'm sitting beside the fire, sipping a hot cup of cocoa and thinking of my sweetheart and wondering how you are, and I just could not go to bed until I sent you a letter. Now, I want to pause here for a moment. We're going to dive into Finchley, and we're also going to dive into Hampstead, which is where Lucy lived, because I don't think we've really gone over that yet or really detailed that yet. And if you follow us on in social media, then you've seen the clip of the flat where Lucy lived and wrote most of the letters from, and so that's in Hampstead, and I'm going to talk about that in just a second. But Finchley was another place that Megan and I visited in 2023 when we went because Lucy was baptized at the St. Paul's Church in Finchley, and we visited there. And so this is where she was. So obviously, she's familiar with this area. She has friends that live there, and she's gone to visit. We don't really know who, but she's with friends. Now, when Megan and I went, we were walking through the neighborhood. There were quiet residential streets, kind of a village like feeling, even though it is part of Greater London. This was kind of on the outskirts a little bit and a quieter neighborhood. Now, I want to take a moment to dive into a little bit of the historical context about Finchley. Like I said, it is part of Greater London, it's in North London, historically a suburban area with a mix of residential streets, small shops, local green spaces. And by 1944, it had been heavily influenced by the war, though it wasn't as industrial as East London or as heavily bombed as Central London. Its residents were a mix of middle class families, professionals, and a growing commuter population who actually lived there but worked in central London. Finchley maintained a somewhat village like atmosphere, like what I was saying. Despite being part of London, it had quiet streets, local pubs, churches, and parks. And then while Finchley wasn't in the heart of the Blitz, by 1944, it still experienced the occasional V1 doodlebug attack and air raid alerts, which could strike at any time. Residents still had to black out their windows, have sandbags ready, and keep gas masks on hand, just like everybody else. It had a tight knit community feel. People knew their neighbors. They gathered at local shops, attended churches together, like St. Paul's, where Lucy was baptized, and churches often became hubs for charity and morale boosting events during the war. By 1944, the V1 flying bombs, the doodlebugs that we've talked about over and over and over and over, and the occasional V2 rockets that were just coming on the scene were the main threat to Finchley. These weapons could strike seemingly at random, and Finchley saw a few near misses, and many locals would have been familiar with the sound of the doodlebugs coming, and the sirens signaling alerts because they were not exempt from all of that, even though they were not in central London. Local air raid shelters were used, often in people's backyards or in public spaces, and some families also dug small shelters in their gardens for these air raid shelters. Fire watching was also common there, just like in Lucy's neighborhood, and local volunteers in the neighborhood would do that as well. Now, the church that we visited, St. Paul's Church, Finchley, it was built in the late 19th century. And I wish we were doing video because I could put some pictures up in the video of us walking through it. And I may do that at another time when we get back to video episodes. But it remained a spiritual and community hub there. And Lucy being baptized there gives a strong sense of her lifelong ties to Finchley, even though this is an interesting fact that we learned that Lucy was not baptized until she was 21 years old. And she may have been when she was a baby, but as far as at St. Paul's Church, Finchley, she was 21. So that was interesting information that we found out. Now, Victoria Park and the local commons were the green spaces where locals could walk and exercise and escape being cramped inside and gather together while still following the blackout rules and things like that. The High Road was Finchley's main shopping street. It had small shops and cafes and pubs, which would probably be where Lucy and her friends spent their time. And a unique fact about Finchley is that it is one of the areas in London that retained that village charm despite the war, making it a comforting, familiar backdrop for someone like Lucy in contrast to the chaos of central London. So I'm sure some people retreated there to get out of the chaos of all the bombing that was happening closer to the central part of London. The term Finchley Way is sometimes used to describe the suburban charm and quiet streets of the area. So I'm sure people in central London may have referred to the Finchley Way when they were talking about that type of living environment and all that. Many Finchley residents were avid gardeners. They had window boxes and backyard plots, flowers, and Lucy probably walked past all these gardens on her way home from there and on the way home from church. If you've been here with us for a while, then you've heard the story of when we were there and we were walking in the neighborhood just past the church we just left, and it was the end of September and there were no flowers hardly anywhere around, and we just came upon this huge pink rose bush that was growing over the wall of one of the houses there on the off the sidewalk. And as you know, those are Lucy's favorite flower, and so that was just a really special moment that we had that day after leaving the church, walking through the neighborhood there, and we just felt like she was there with us. There are also some local pubs and cafes. Those were the social hubs. Even despite the rationing, those were still open and people would meet there. And I imagine that's probably, like I said, where Lucy met up with some of her friends. Now, when she says she's gotten home at 10 o'clock at night in the letter there, and it's cold and foggy, that detail is important and significant also because we've all heard of London fog. We know that's I think there's like a maybe a clothing line or a jacket, and then there's I think a tea, and there's just a London fog is a there's fog in London, but during this time, the fog wasn't just like part of the atmosphere. It wasn't just atmospheric. It was thick, heavy, and mixed with coal smoke. So it wasn't just the fog. The blackout conditions were still in place also. So the streets would have been even more dark and shadows everywhere. And so Lucy getting home and having to walk down those streets in the dark and the thick, thick fog that's mixed with smoke would have felt probably exhausting to do. And by the time she got home, even after she had been at work or whatever, she's probably tired from all that. She getting home through the fog like that would have been even more exhausting. Now, Lucy was coming home to Hampstead. And like I said, I don't think we've really detailed Hampstead and where she lived, but it wasn't really a quiet suburb, quite like Finchley. It did have kind of a village feel, but not quite like Finchley. But it's a mix of charming streets, leafy gardens, and a lively artistic community, and that's what's different about it. By 1944, it also had been shaped by the war like the rest of London. Blackout curtains over the windows, rationing in every household, the hum of the bombs and hearing all that, the air raids, all of that. But despite that, Hampstead still had a calm, almost village-like character similar to Finchley, with its streets, small shops, local cafes, churches tucked between houses. But even there in Hampstead, danger was never far away. As we know, Lucy was had to do the fire watch duty, and so the danger was real. Air raid sirens would sound, doodlebugs sometimes fell really close by, reminding everyone that even leafy Hampstead wasn't completely safe. And that leafy part, I know I've said that a couple of times, and everywhere you look and everywhere you try to research Hampstead, it talks about that. It describes it as leafy. So part of that is the gardens and the Hampstead Heath and all of that. We'll get to that in just a second. But some more really fun facts about Hampstead is its cultural and artistic vibe that it had. It has long been known as a hub for artists and writers and intellectuals, celebrities, actors, actresses, uh, sports figures. But in the 1940s, it had that creative vibe. Think of painters and poets and academics living there in Hampstead. Lucy may have walked past studios or bookshops and literary salons where lots of famous people, she probably passed on the street or passed by these places where they frequented. Now, I think of that as like New York. If you live somewhere like New York, you live there, actually live there and spend a lot of time there, eventually you're going to pass by someone famous. You're going to see someone famous eventually. And so I think the first episode that we had, she was standing beside a famous person. I can't remember his name, but he was like a comedic actor. I can't remember his name. But anyway, so she's already in London. She's already come across someone famous. But some famous residents that actually lived there in Hampstead, going back a good while ago, D.H. Lawrence was an extremely controversial writer, very famous for his novels, and one that we may like. I've seen on Netflix. I've never watched this, but some of the movies that have come from his books. Lady Chatterley's Lover. I've not seen that, but I've seen the advertisement or whatever on Netflix. So he was he would have been a very famous writer. Also, the romantic poet John Keats, and that was much earlier, I think, in the 1800s sometime. But and then Catherine Mansfield's circle, she was an internationally acclaimed writer. But Hampstead always had that air of artistic sophistication and the place people wanted to be. Here's a list of some notable people who have actually lived there recently or even currently. And funny fact is when we were riding to Hampstead and we were in the black cab, our cab driver, and they are so awesome. Let me just insert that. Black cabs in London are worth every penny that you spend to ride in them. Not just because you're not sharing a space with a bunch of other people, like on the bus or the tube or whatever, and they're much more comfortable, of course. but you get to see everything. Even though sometimes you get stuck in traffic, you get to see everything. But you also have a wealth of knowledge in these black cab drivers. They are awesome. Every single one that we rode in was just full of information, and they love telling you things. They're just so nice and polite, and they're fun to ride with. And they're just, if you've ever ridden in a taxi in New York City, it's nothing like that. It's quite the opposite. The black cabs in London are nothing like that. So if you do get a chance to go to London, you may not want to do it every time because it does cost a good bit of money. But if you can take a black cab for a little bit and just ride with them and talk to them, they were awesome, every single one of them. So I do want to give a shout out to our black cab drivers. But the one we had that was taking us to Hampstead, he went on and on about the area and how famous people lived there. And it was just a really awesome area and people loved it. And so we had no idea. Now, had I known that and had I really researched that aspect of it before we went, I probably would have gotten one of our cab drivers to take us on a little famous person tour or whatever and drive by people's homes like, there's where so and so lives. That's probably what we'll do next time. I wish I had known that before we went last time because, and here's some of the people, I just wanted to say all that to say this. People like Hugh Laurie, if you've ever watched the show House, then you know who I'm talking about. House, Hugh Laurie. Emma Thompson, and that goes without saying. She's great. She's a very famous actress. Helena Bonham Carter, I love her. And I recently just watched, I can't think of the name of it, a show. Oh goodness, I can't think of the name of it, but she was in it. She's so good. I love her in everything that she's in. Ricky Gervais, comedian, actor. Harry Styles, the pop star, has lived in Hampstead since his early days and has reportedly bought multiple properties on the same street as where he lived. And then Dua Lipa, pop star, she grew up in the area, attended a school for girls there, and reportedly owns a very large Victorian home in West Hampstead. Other names like George Orwell, Elizabeth Taylor, Daniel Craig, and Rachel Weisz. He's the James Bond actor, and his wife, Rachel, is a very famous actress as well. But they reportedly live in a Hampstead home there. Benedict Cumberbatch, he's very famous. Though technically, I think he lives just outside of Hampstead in a place called Gospel Oak. But he is very closely tied to the Hampstead area and is very active in local community issues there. Also, Sting, Ozzy Osbourne, and others have lived or worked in and around Hampstead over the decades. So I thought that was just really, really interesting and fun to know. And like I said, I wish I'd known that before we went last time. Now, it attracts famous residents mainly because of this unique combination of the historic architecture, the leafy streets, the close proximity to central London without actually living in the city. So that provides privacy and a quiet village-like charm for them. Hampstead Heath and other outdoor spaces that even the celebrities like to enjoy, but they wouldn't really necessarily want to do it so much in the central London because that's where all the tourists are. That's where you're going to run into a million people who are going to stop you every 5 seconds. So that is why, and I can totally understand why they love that area. I mentioned Hampstead Heath. That's one of London's largest green spaces. I'm thinking maybe similar to Central Park in New York, maybe. And during the war, it became a gathering spot for like exercise and picnics and even wartime shelters for people who were displaced by the bombing. Hampstead Heath also had ancient ponds. They were man-made ancient ponds that have been there, I think I read, from the 17th and 18th centuries. And that actually provided water for Hampstead. And then Hampstead streets like Fellows Road, where Lucy lived, were lined with Georgian and Victorian homes. If you saw the little clip that I posted, then you can kind of see that street that Lucy lives on, and you see those brick buildings and just how beautiful they are. It's so, so beautiful. And I think I mentioned how expensive it is to live there. Megan and I were like, let's move there, just joking. Of course, I couldn't leave my family, but um, I looked up some of the prices, and the last price that I saw of a selling price for Lucy's flat was, I think, $400,000, and that was in 2011. So you can only imagine what it would cost today. So very nice neighborhood. This would have been the typical neighborhood there, elegant but modest. And so she lived there in the area, and it had that slightly eccentric feel to it. Academics and artists mingled with ordinary families, giving it that sophisticated feel and along with that charm. Now, during wartime, Hampstead residents were very civic minded. There were local committees organizing rationing support, charity drives, war bond events, and then, of course, the fire watching duties. Lucy was a part of that, so she was part of that, being that civic minded feel that the community had there. Tea rooms and cafes remain popular even during rationing. And we often hear Lucy talk about going and having tea with someone. So maybe she went to some of these tea rooms. And they also had secret wartime hideaways like old garden sheds or what they called heath shelters that became kind of impromptu refuges for people during air raid alerts. Now, many Hampstead residents like Lucy were very highly educated and literate, which kind of helps explain her letters and the elegant, thoughtful tone that she has and the detail that she provides and just very articulate. That kind of explains that. Hampstead is still considered to this day one of London's most desirable neighborhoods, and for all the reasons just mentioned. But to put it simply, to go back to kind of compare Finchley and Hampstead, they may both be in North London, but they felt very different from each other. For you South Carolina listeners, people who are from upcountry South Carolina, Finchley was more like an established Greenville neighborhood. Practical, family oriented, deeply familiar. It was the kind of place you grew up, you went to church, you knew everyone on your street. Now, Hampstead, on the other hand, was more like North Main Street area near Falls Park. Still residential and leafy, but much more cultured, more sought after, and closer to the energy of the city, but not actually in the heart, like right in the middle of the city. Finchley felt rooted in routine, but Hampstead felt refined and connected and a much more artistic vibe and creative vibe there. So that's all I'm going to say about Finchley and Hampstead. I know that was a lot, but I did want to detail that because that's where Lucy lived and she spent a lot of her time there. So I want to make sure to kind of give you a feel of the community and the neighborhood where she lived. So she is talking about the fire that she's lit. She's sitting beside the fire. That likely means a very small coal fire because coal was rationed just like everything else. So fires had to be kept modest because you didn't want to waste your fuel. If you had families, y'all would cluster around the fire, make the most of it, let your hands get warm, try to warm up your bones because you didn't want to waste your fuel and you want to take advantage of every moment that it was burning. And that hot cup of cocoa that she's drinking, that's a little bit of luxury. Cocoa was rationed too. We have an episode that talks a lot about chocolate and how there were fillers in chocolate, and even chocolate bars sometimes will have a piece of wood in it with the chocolate around the wood so that you would still, it's kind of like a psychological trick to make you think you were getting something uh, that was not changed during the war. And so cocoa was rationed. It was a delicacy sometimes, but it wasn't always easy to come by. So she probably saved this or had stretched it out or even used a substitute to mix it in with it. So the fact that she's sitting there sipping this tells us something specific. It tells us that she is intentionally creating a moment of comfort for herself. This is kind of her version of self care in wartime. The fire lit, this warm cocoa in her hand, and then, of course, her thoughts are on Jimmie. And I love that she says she couldn't go to bed without writing to him. After a long day, late being out with her friends, the fog coming home, and always that uncertainty that's pressing in, the thing that she needs before sleep is always that connection with Jimmie. Writing to him is how she settles herself at the very end of her day, is how she keeps him close, even with that war between them, even with all that distance between them, that's how she keeps him close. She goes on to say, my other picture was finished yesterday, so I am enclosing it and hope you will like it. Do you think it is better than the first one? Well, darling, I miss you very much and long for the time when we shall be together always. I am always looking at your picture and wishing you could kiss me back and hold me tight. And I am being very true to you, just as I hope you are to me, although sometimes I cannot help feeling a little restless and melancholy because you are so far away. But as soon as I look at your picture and lovely ring, I am happy again and think how lucky I am to have someone so dear and fine to wait for. So here we get another glimpse into Lucy's emotional state. She kind of takes us on these roller coasters of emotion sometimes, of being positive and happy, and then she gets real with how she's really feeling, and then she tries to be funny, and so she kind of goes through all these emotions. And when she talks about enclosing another picture, it's not a casual statement. We have talked about how having photographs or portraits taken during the war was a very big deal. The film was limited, money was tight, and these photos mattered. And she's clearly thinking about how she appears to him, wondering if this version of the picture feels closer to him or if he loved it more than the last one. And all this that she's asking, it just feels so human, and we all do it. And she wants that reassurance, and we all want reassurance, and she wants to be seen by him. And so she's really trying to pull that out of him because, as you can probably, or as you probably saw last time or felt last time, Jimmie doesn't write a whole lot. And number one, he's a man, and men just don't write in detail as much as women overall. And so she's trying to pull information out of him. She's trying to pull the conversation out of him. Now, if she were face to face with him, of course, she would just ask him, "What do you think about it? Do you like this one better?" But she can't do that. So she's doing this through the letter, trying to get that reassurance. And then she moves into missing him, how she's longing to be with him, and how physically she wants to be with him, but she just doesn't miss him in an abstract way. She wants him to kiss her back. She talks about the physical ways, hold her tight. And that kind of closeness was completely unavailable to them at this time. And it just kind of not amazes me, but it's just kind of points to the fact that she allows herself, a lot of times we don't allow ourselves to feel certain things because it hurts too much or it's too painful, but she's always allowing herself to take herself in her mind to these places of being with him and imagining he's holding her and imagining all of this. And she just fully feels her emotions. She fully is open to that and vulnerable to that. And I really admire her for that because a lot of times we just don't do that in life, especially now. But I told you last time that uh, I was going to dig into where Jimmie was, what he's up to, and a little bit more what's going on with him. So, for the first time listeners, if you're still listening, just briefly, I'll tell you a little bit about where he is, but I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time there. Um, he is, of course, in Europe. He's after the breakout from Normandy in the late summer of 1944, the Allied forces raced eastward across northern France and into Belgium. And the 50th Signal Battalion's job was to keep communications open between headquarters and the forward elements as the front lines shifted. That meant they were laying wire, setting up switchboards, and maintaining radio and telephone links under combat conditions. They were literally keeping the army talking as it moved. And so by September of 1944, units supported by the 50th Signal Battalion were beginning to cross into Belgium and toward the German border, and signal units would have been following close behind the parts of the combat units. They were installing and maintaining communications infrastructure across long distances and sometimes in recently liberated territory, which we've talked about the dangers of that and what all that entailed. Now, October was a transitional month for them. The rapid advance from Normandy was slowing down a bit because as they stretched out into Germany, that German resistance kind of stiffened up. And for the Signal Corps, that meant not only keeping existing lines functional, but also preparing for the next phases of the campaign, which included the push into the Rhineland and later the Battle of the Bulge in December. And you're probably familiar with that. But from our wonderful resource, the book Key to Command, which is the book by Michael Godbout, our friend that we have connected with, it tells us all about the intricate details of the 50th Signal Battalion. We now know that October was a very difficult month for the battalion. Now, obviously, the entire time it was difficult, but specifically October was difficult because the weather was horrible, making their working conditions even harder. They had several wounded and also suffered some casualties. And so I want to read something out of the book because I can never paraphrase any of what I'm about to read, but I want to read a little bit so that you can kind of get a feel for what they were dealing with here. And starting on page 232, it says, throughout the month, the core area was subjected to repeated enemy shellings and air attacks. On October 3rd and 4th, 1944, the area was rocked by the shelling of Aachen. We talked about the Battle of Aachen before. Enemy planes often dropped anti-personnel bombs and flares, keeping the men in muddy foxholes. The next day, October 5th, 1944, Private Harry C. Stiesel, and I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. If I'm not, please forgive me. But he was wounded during an air raid, dying later that day of his wounds. And another one of the soldiers, Barrettlian, if I'm saying that right, he said, Harry Stiesel, a switchboard operator, was killed a few feet from me by a wild round fired from dogfighting planes. And then it goes on to say, the night of October 9th, 1944, Private First Class Vernon L. Arends was wounded in the foot during an air raid while in the A Company area, and the A Company was what Jimmie was part of. Private First Class Irwin Stone was injured during an artillery attack while returning from duty to the bivouac area near the train station shortly after midnight, October 16th and 17th, 1944. First Lieutenant Julius B. Ratner, the battalion dentist, and technician 5th grade Edward O. Linton came to his aid and tried to evacuate him. The shell fire continued. Ratner was seriously injured in the attack, and Linton was killed. Linton was attended to by Captain Jack Wagner, the battalion surgeon, but he could not be saved. Following the incident, Captain Wagner requested a transfer. And then this is where I was getting to. This account from Mo J. Green. It says he remembered, we were shelled one night in Kornelimünster, if I'm saying that correctly. That's a place in Germany. And it says, and it's talking about Jack Wagner, the battalion surgeon. He fixed the guy's leg in the dark. One of his own medics that got his leg shot off, and he amputated the rest of it without lights right in my chair. We were all down in the basement in this railroad station where we were getting shelled. The next morning, they had a big powwow over how everything happened. Some of the medics from Corps came and took a look at that man's leg and said they had never saw such a professional job of amputation. The guy died in my chair. Those guys never saw such a professional job of amputation as that one, and Captain Wagner did it in the dark. Right after that, he asked to be relieved. He couldn't take it anymore. And so I wanted to read that to honor these men and also just to understand fully what they were going through. And this book, I know I've said it a lot, but this book is excellent. And you will not find this information anywhere else. In our research efforts before we met Michael Godbout, the author of this book, we were trying to find information about the 50th Signal Battalion. There's just not a lot out there. And that's one of the reasons that Michael wrote this book. He wanted the voice of the Signal Battalion to be heard. He wanted the experiences documented. And he wanted he wanted these stories to be told. And even now, if you go on ChatGPT, which supposedly is all knowing and you can find anything, if you go type in and try to find information about the 50th Signal Battalion, what exactly they were doing, what they were going through, it will tell you that there's not a lot of information out there about it. So this book, you're not going to find the information that's in this book. You're not going to find it anywhere else on the earth. So I highly, highly, highly recommend this book. I'm going to put a link in our description. If you are interested in this type of thing, this book is well worth it. So I'm going to put a link here. Michael won a bronze medal in the military writing awards, and it's just awesome. So grab that book. And Michael's a great guy. We interviewed him, or I interviewed him. I don't know how long ago it was, but you can go back and find the interview. It was just a great time. We are hopefully going to get to meet in person sometime in the near future, and then we're trying so hard to make it happen to where when we go back to London, it will be at the same time that Michael and his wife are over there in Europe. And we are talking about trying to meet up in France while we're both over there. So I'm hoping that can happen, and we'll keep y'all posted on that because we'll definitely take y'all along for that if we can make that happen. Now, to sum all this up, it's easy when we hear Signal Battalion, to imagine something that's kind of safe or distant from all the danger, but that wasn't their reality. Jimmie's job wasn't done from behind a desk. He and the men he served with were often right behind the fighting, the front lines, moving into areas that had only just changed hands, and sometimes while things were still very, very unsettled. They were out in the open. They were stringing miles of wire across fields and roads and climbing up poles. They were exposed a lot. They were fixing broken lines in bad, awful weather and working long hours so commanders could send orders and get updates and stay in touch. If those lines went down, everything slowed down or stopped, and messages couldn't go through. Decisions could not be made. So while they weren't on the front lines with rifles, they were still exposed to the danger and the exhaustion and the uncertainty every single day. Their work kept the Army connected, and without them, the advance across Europe simply would not have been able to happen. I just think that would have been a very different outcome had the battalion, Signal Battalion, not been able to do their job the way they did. So knowing all of that gives Lucy's letters even more weight, because when she tells him to take care of himself and she's worried about him, she isn't just being affectionate. She's fully aware that his job, though quiet and technical, his job carried real risk. And I'm sure when they were together in person, he told her a lot more than he can now in letters. So back to what Lucy was saying in her letter, what really stands out to me in this part is how honest she is about her emotional state, where here she admits to feeling restless and feeling melancholy. She doesn't romanticize the separation. She acknowledges how hard it is to be faithful. And I think that's very brave of her to admit that. She feels that feels comfortable enough with Jimmie to be that honest with him and say, look, I'm just going to be honest here. You're a long way away and I'm feeling restless and melancholy. And then it says, she looks at looks at his picture, looks at her ring, and she grounds herself again. So that ring is her anchor. And I know if you've been here a while, you know we still have that ring today, the engagement ring that Jimmie bought her on New Bond Street. And knowing all of this and hearing her talk about it the way she does, and knowing everything they were going through, and holding that same ring today, it's just, I don't know. It's one of the most priceless possessions that we have. And I'm not talking about the monetary value of it. I'm talking about the history, the emotional history, the significance that ring represents here. And it's still here with us. And we are so, so grateful to have that. She goes on to say, oh, darling, I'm always looking forward to the future and thinking how happy we shall be. And I'm sure we shall have lots of fun too. But it is a great pity that you are not ticklish, as I shall have to think of some other way to tease you. This part of the letter makes me smile. It's so playful. It's another part of her personality that we get to see, that she's a lot of fun, and she's trying to make him laugh and trying to lift his spirits. She's not just imagining a future, she's imagining the fun that they're going to have, and the teasing and the laughter and the jokes and all of that. And I love when she shares this type of thing with him, because it gives us some more insight into her and their relationship and how they are affectionate towards one another. Now, Lucy lived with us when I was growing up. She passed away right before I turned 12, and I spent a lot of time with her. I spent every day with her. I went to the grocery store with her and helped her shop, and she taught me how to play the piano. I spent a lot of time with her. We played checkers all the time, and I was around her a lot. But through these letters, I feel like I know her better now than I did even when she was still alive. So I'm very grateful for these letters. And when she writes to him here, she still thinks, and I try to keep this in mind, that at this point, they still think that it's not going to be much longer that they're going to be reunited. And they still think that they're going to be able to get married in London. At this point, they still think that. And, now we know that they still have another year and a half of waiting and writing and hoping and holding on to moments like this. And so it's kind of sad. It's kind of heartbreaking at the same time, even though these are very beautiful letters. It is kind of heartbreaking knowing what we know now. She closes the letter with, take great care of yourself, darling, and please write to me soon. With all my love, from your very own Lucy. And then she puts 6 small X's and then a large X. And beside that large X, and she does this every time, and we've talked about this some too, but that large X, she said, this is where I always put my special kiss. I expect you think I'm too sentimental, but it's your fault because you make me feel that way. I love the way she explains that. That one special X she always includes. That's so sweet, and I love that she explains that here and tells him it's his fault that she's so sentimental. it's a beautiful way for her to end the letter, and she does it every single time. And I'm sure that steadiness and that familiarity that she puts at the end of her letters, I'm sure that is very comforting to Jimmie, and I just love it so much. As we close out this letter, what stays with me most is how ordinary and extraordinary at the same time all of this is. Lucy isn't trying to document history when she's writing these letters. She's not trying to do that. Yet these are definitely historical documents. And I was just talking to someone a couple of days about this. These letters are incredible. She's just trying to stay connected to the person she loves. And yet through that effort, she gives us something rare, this honest human record of what it meant to wait and to hope and to live and to love during wartime, specifically wartime London. And this letter reminds us that history doesn't only live in the battles and in the headlines, but it lives here in these late nights and these small jokes and these photographs tucked into envelopes and kisses marked with an X at the end of a letter. That's where it lives. That's where history lives. It of course lives in the big moments, in the big war and what Jimmie is doing over there in Europe, where away from her. That was so important. The history books tell us of the importance. We don't have to look very far and we see the importance of that. But it also lives in these moments that Lucy's sharing with us here. And I love that we have this. Now, next time, Lucy responds to the letter from Jimmie that we read last time. And she also talks about having a close call with a doodlebug. And also the same night, she had an experience with an air raid alert while she's on Firewatch. And I don't think we've had one of those yet. So it's definitely a letter that you don't want to miss next time. And then I think the takeaway here from this letter, I know I've given you some challenges lately, but I think the takeaway from this letter here is love doesn't just live in big moments. Love isn't just proven in big moments. It lives and it's proven in consistency, in showing up again and again and again, even when it's hard, and especially when it's hard. So here's a small challenge for you this week. Think about someone you care deeply about, a friend, a family member, a partner, and consider how you show up for them when things feel uncertain or distant. Let connection this week be very intentional. Intentionally show up for someone. And I think that it changes relationships when we do that. If this love story resonates with you and you want to continue walking through these letters with us, make sure you're subscribed so that you don't miss any future episodes. We are also on Facebook and Instagram, and that gives a little more personal feel, and we post things there, updates and things like that there. So if you want to, everything's under All My Love Lucy Podcast. You can find us there. And thank you for being here. Thanks again. We appreciate it. Thanks for listening, making the time to join us and listen with us. And as always, we're going to end with an uninterrupted reading of this letter. So until next time, enjoy. October 15th, 1944. My darling Jimmie, I have just returned home at 10 p.m. after spending the day with some friends at Finchley. And it is cold and foggy, so I'm sitting beside the fire, sipping a hot cup of cocoa and thinking of my sweetheart and wondering how you are. And I just could not go to bed until I sent you a letter. My other picture was finished yesterday, so I'm enclosing it and hope you will like it. Do you think it's better than the first one? Well, darling, I miss you very much and long for the time when we shall be together always. I am always looking at your picture and wishing you could kiss me back and hold me tight. And I'm being very true to you, just as I hope you are to me, although sometimes I cannot help feeling a little restless and melancholy because you're so far away. But as soon as I look at your picture and lovely ring, I am happy again and think how lucky I am to have someone so dear and fine to wait for. Oh, darling, I am always looking forward to the future and thinking how happy we shall be. And I am sure we shall have lots of fun too, but it's a great pity you are not ticklish, as I shall have to think of some other way to tease you. Take great care of yourself, darling, and please write to me soon. With all my love from your very own Lucy. This is where I always put my special kiss. I expect you think I'm too sentimental, but it's your fault because you make me feel that way.